20 years ago, she gave everything she had to 3 abandoned girls no one wanted. Today, they stood before her, and what they did left the whole town in tears. But to understand this moment, we must go back to the day Grace first opened her door to the unwanted. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Grace Miller was 52 years old when her life changed forever. She lived in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, in a white farmhouse at the end of Maple Road. The house had been silent for 3 years, ever since her husband Robert died in a collision on Route 30. The accident took him instantly. Grace survived, but something inside her broke that day. The doctors said she'd never be able to have children. The universe, it seemed, had decided her chapter as a mother was closed before it ever began. She spent her days working part-time at the local clinic, helping families bring new life into the world while returning each night to an empty home. The nursery she and Robert had painted yellow still sat untouched upstairs, the crib they'd assembled together gathering dust in the corner. Some nights, Grace would stand in the doorway of that room and just stare, wondering what could have been. Her neighbors meant well. They'd bring casseroles and tell her to move on, to sell the house, maybe move closer to the city where her sister lived. But Grace couldn't leave. This house held every memory of Robert. Every creak in the floorboards, every stain on the kitchen counter told a story of the life they'd built together. On a cold October evening, Grace was driving home from the clinic when she saw them. 3 small figures huddled together near the steps of St. Michael's Church. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that soaks through clothes in seconds. At first, she thought they were waiting for someone, maybe their parents were inside. But as she slowed down, she saw their faces, pale and frightened, eyes wide like animals caught in headlights. The oldest couldn't have been more than 9. The youngest looked barely 3, clutching a torn stuffed rabbit, her lips turning blue from the cold. Grace pulled over and rolled down her window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The oldest girl, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big, looked at her with distrust. "We're fine," she said quietly, pulling the younger ones closer. But they weren't fine. Their clothes were soaked, their shoes worn through. Grace could see it in their eyes, that hollow look of children who've learned too young that the world is not a safe place. She got out of the car and walked toward them slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal. "What are your names? Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I'm Lydia. This is Mira and that's Tess. Our mom left us here. She said someone from the church would come, but no one did." Grace's heart sank. She looked around. The church was locked, the parking lot empty. It was nearly 8 o'clock at night. "How long have you been waiting?" "Since this morning," Lydia said, her voice cracking. Grace didn't think. She just acted. "Get in the car," she said gently. "You can't stay out here. You'll freeze." Lydia shook her head. "We're not supposed to go with strangers." Grace knelt down in the rain, meeting her eyes. "I know, sweetheart. And you're right to be careful. But I'm a nurse and I promise you, I just want to make sure you're safe and warm tonight. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." For a long moment, Lydia just stared at her, searching her face for some sign of whether to trust this stranger. Finally she nodded. They climbed into Grace's car, silent and shivering, and she drove them home. That first night, Grace gave them hot soup and clean clothes. She ran warm baths for each of them, and tucked them into the guest beds upstairs. Mira fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted. Tess clung to her stuffed rabbit and wouldn't let go. Lydia stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something bad to happen. Grace sat on the edge of her bed and whispered, "You're safe here. I promise." The next morning, Grace called social services. She explained the situation and waited for someone to come. But when the caseworker arrived, the news wasn't good. "We'll have to place them in the system," the woman said, flipping through paperwork. It could take weeks to find a foster home willing to take all 3. They might have to be separated. Grace felt something twist in her chest. Separated? They're sisters. The caseworker sighed. "I understand, but resources are limited. Most families can only take 1, maybe 2 children at a time." Grace looked over at the 3 girls sitting together on the couch, holding hands, and she made a decision that would change all of their lives. "What if I kept them?" she asked. The caseworker looked up, surprised. You want to foster them? Grace nodded. Just until you find something permanent. The caseworker studied her for a moment, then handed her a stack of forms. You'll need to pass a home inspection and background check. It's not a simple process. Grace took the papers. I understand. 2 weeks later, Grace became their temporary foster mother. Temporary turned into months. Months turned into a year. No one came forward to claim them. Their mother was never found. And slowly, carefully, the girls began to trust her. Lydia, the oldest, was quiet and watchful, always testing boundaries to see if Grace would snap, if she'd give up on them like everyone else had. Mira was the opposite, talkative and curious, asking a million questions about everything. Why do birds fly south? Why is the sky blue? Do you think our mom will come back? Grace answered every question with patience, even the ones that broke her heart. And Tess, the baby, barely spoke at all. She'd sit for hours clutching that stuffed rabbit, watching the world with wide, sad eyes. Grace enrolled them in school, packed their lunches every morning, helped with homework every night. She taught them how to bake cookies, how to tie their shoes, how to ride bikes. She read to them before bed, the same way she'd imagined reading to her own children. Slowly, the house that had been so quiet for so long filled with noise again. Laughter, arguments, the sound of small feet running down the hallway. For the first time since Robert died, Grace felt like she had a purpose. But it wasn't easy. Grace's savings were running out. Foster care payments barely covered groceries. She picked up extra shifts at the clinic, working nights and weekends. Her friends started to pull away. Some thought she was crazy for taking on 3 kids at her age. Others whispered behind her back that she was trying to replace Robert, that she was setting herself up for heartbreak. One neighbor told her plainly, Grace, those girls aren't yours. You're getting too attached. Grace just smiled and said maybe. But they need someone to get attached to. By the time Lydia turned 16, cracks started to show. She'd grown into a sharp, intelligent young woman, but anger simmered just beneath the surface. She'd ask questions Grace couldn't answer. Why did our mom leave us? Why didn't anyone want us? Grace would try to explain that sometimes people are broken, that it wasn't their fault, but Lydia didn't want explanations. She wanted someone to blame. And sometimes that someone was Grace. One night, after a particularly bad day at school, Lydia came home and found Grace sorting through bills at the kitchen table. There were too many red envelopes, too many final notices. How much longer can we even stay here? Lydia asked, her voice cold. Grace looked up, tired. What do you mean? Don't lie to me, Lydia snapped. I know we're broke. I know you sold Robert's truck last year. I heard you on the phone with the bank. Grace sighed. We're going to be okay. I'll figure it out. Lydia laughed bitterly. You can't even take care of yourself. Why did you take us in? Out of pity? Grace stood up, her voice firm but gentle. I took you in because you deserved a home. Because I loved you the moment I saw you. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. You're not even our real mother. The words hung in the air like a slap. Grace felt her heart crack, but she kept her voice steady. No, I'm not. But I'm the one who stayed. Lydia stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Grace sat back down at the table and cried for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Mira was struggling too. She'd started skipping classes, hanging out with the wrong crowd. Grace tried to talk to her, but Mira had built walls. And Tess, now 13, was diagnosed with a chronic illness that required expensive medication and regular hospital visits. Grace sold the last piece of land Robert had left her, the plot where they'd planned to build a retirement cabin. She used the money to pay for Tess's treatment. One morning, Grace woke up and found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Lydia. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Don't come looking for me. Grace's hands shook as she read it. She called the police, filed a missing persons report, drove to every place she could think of. But Lydia was gone. Mira and Tess were devastated. The house felt emptier than it ever had. Grace kept Lydia's room exactly as she'd left it, hoping one day she'd come home. 5 years passed. Grace aged faster than she should have. The stress, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, it all took its toll. Her hair turned white. Her hands developed a tremor. But she kept going. Mira graduated high school and enrolled in nursing school, inspired by Grace's years of service. Tessa's health improved, and she set her sights on studying law, determined to help other kids like them. Grace was proud, but a piece of her heart was always missing. Then one afternoon the phone rang. "Mrs. Miller? This is Detective Harris from Philadelphia. We have your daughter Lydia in custody." Grace's blood went cold. "Custody? What happened?" "She's been arrested for fraud and identity theft. We need you to come down to the station." Grace didn't hesitate. She drove 3 hours to Philadelphia, walked into that police station, and when she saw Lydia sitting in a cell, looking so much older and so much more broken, she didn't ask questions. She just posted bail. Outside, Lydia couldn't look at her. "Why did you come?" Grace's voice was soft. "Because you're my daughter." Lydia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm nothing. I've done terrible things. You don't even know the half of it." Grace reached out and took her hand. "I don't care what you've done. I care about you." Lydia broke down completely. Grace held her, right there on the sidewalk, the way she'd held her that first night in the rain. But Lydia didn't come home. She said she needed to figure things out on her own. Grace let her go, but she made her promise to call once a week. And Lydia did. Every Sunday night, without fail. It wasn't much, but it was something. On Grace's 70th birthday, she wasn't expecting much. Mira and Tess had called earlier to say they'd stop by later with cake. Grace spent the morning in her garden, pulling weeds and thinking about how fast time had flown. She thought about Robert, about the girls, about all the choices she'd made. She wondered if she'd done enough. Around noon, a black car pulled up in front of the house. Grace didn't recognize it. Then the doors opened, and 3 women stepped out. Grace's breath caught. Lydia, Mira, and Tess, all dressed beautifully, walking toward her with flowers in their hands. Grace stood frozen, her gardening gloves covered in dirt. "Girls." Lydia reached her first and dropped to her knees. "Mama, I'm so sorry. For everything. For all the pain I caused." Grace pulled her up into a hug, tears streaming down both their faces. Mira and Tess joined them, and for a long moment, they just held each other. Finally, Mira pulled back and smiled. "We have something to show you." They led Grace to the town hall, where a crowd had gathered. Grace was confused. "What's going on?" Tess took her hand. "You gave us a home when no one else would. Now we want to give that gift to other kids." They unveiled a large wooden sign that read Grace's house, a home for children who need one. It was a newly established foundation, funded by all 3 of them, dedicated to helping abandoned and foster children find permanent, loving homes. Grace covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "But that's not all," Lydia said quietly. She handed Grace a folder. Inside was a property deed. The land. Robert's land. The one Grace had sold years ago to save Tess. "We bought it back for you," Lydia whispered. "You gave up everything for us. We wanted to give you something back." Grace sank into a chair, sobbing. The whole town clapped and cheered. Strangers came up to thank her, to tell her how much she'd inspired them. That evening, Grace sat on her porch with the 3 women who'd once been frightened little girls in the rain. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Mira leaned her head on Grace's shoulder. "You saved us, you know." Grace shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. You saved me. I was so lost after Robert died. I didn't know how to live anymore. But you 3, you gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me hope." Lydia reached over and took her hand. "We were so angry for so long. We didn't understand why we were abandoned, why life was so hard. But you never gave up on us. Even when we gave up on ourselves." Tess wiped her eyes. "You taught us what love really means. Not the easy kind. The kind that stays even when it's hard." Grace smiled through her tears. "That's the only kind of love worth having." As the stars began to appear, Grace looked at the 3 women beside her, and felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. She thought about all the people who told her she was crazy, that she'd regret it, that those girls would break her heart. And maybe they were right. Maybe her heart had been broken 100 times, but it had also been filled in ways she never imagined. She'd lost Robert. She'd lost her dream of biological children. But she'd gained something just as precious. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love that refused to quit. Would you have done what Grace did? Could you open your home and your heart to children the world had forgotten? If this story touched you, think about the Graces in your own community, the people who choose love over comfort every single day. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because somewhere, right now, a child is waiting for someone to see them, to choose them, to say, "You are wanted." Thank you for watching. If you'd like to hear more stories that will restore your faith in humanity, subscribe and turn on notifications. Next time, we'll tell you about a widow who stood alone against an entire village, and what happened next will leave you speechless.